So Simon, a lot of your work involves currencies and standardization and things of that nature, correct?
That's correct. It's been like that probably for the last 15 to 20 years. Certainly as we go across the world, even GRPs are different between countries. So a GRP is different in the UK to Germany, to France, and certainly to the US. Standardization just in the TV market has been an incredibly difficult task to achieve. And now, of course, we're moving into standardization of currency across the whole of total video. TV, no longer television, but total video.
And you've been working with some governing bodies and standards bodies here in Europe to sort of accelerate the European market. Can you tell me specifically about those initiatives?
Yeah, sure. For many years, I was working on the technical committee of BARB, the British Audience Research Bureau. So that's the Joint Industry Committee. Unlike the US, where there's the MRC, in Europe, most countries will have a Joint Industry Committee from the television vendors, from some advertisers or their representative body. So ISBAR, the Incorporated Society of British Advertisers, similar to the ANA in the US, and IPA, the Institute of Practitioners of Advertising, same as the 4As in the US. So they will create a joint industry committee, and each of the countries in Europe, and I think this is probably the big difference between the US and Europe in particular, is there are 40 or so organisations and countries. So even standardisation between them is different. So there are some umbrella organisations. One is the EACA, the European Association of Communication Agencies, and I sit on their Media Agency Council, looking particularly at measurement in all its glory, across all aspects of measurement, not just TV ratings, but all the way through to ROI outcomes, and then back into some of the planning metrics that we might use, whether that be brand tracking or a lot of the new metrics that have come through from the digital disruption and innovation there's been over the last decade or so. But working with that organisation, I've had contact with the IAB Europe, which is the umbrella organisation for the individual country IABs, and exactly the same as the IAB in the US, the trade organisation for the digital publishers, but also working with an organisation called ICOM, which is the data and marketing organisation globally. It's not a JIC, and it's based though as a broad tent, a circus almost some would call it, for all of those governance bodies from around the world. So people from all of those organisations that I've just given you the initials for are members of ICOM, and there's an annual conference where we talk about really leading edge and non-commercially based approaches to how we can make measurement make sense.
And if you had to describe at a point in time right now the appetite or sentiment of Europe, I know it's not a country, but in general, given that you're involved in sort of pan-European organizations, the general sentiment and appetite for standardization and common currencies on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being hungry, ready, I wanted it yesterday, where would you score it?
I'd have to give it a number of scores. I would say in terms of the groups that I meet with, it would be a 6. 5 wouldn't be enough to stress it. But in terms of the governance area, probably a 2 to 3. In terms of some of the commercial and political barriers, 1. And I won't say, and to be frank with you, it might be from advertiser, it might be from broadcaster, it may be from digital platform, it may even be from agency side. There's a lot of frustrations in terms of the actual way we can practice our audience measurement and use that measurement to actually advise the advertiser on the effectiveness of their investment. And that really, I think, is the driver behind all of this, and that's why the WFA, the Worldwide Federation of Advertisers, have initiated and brought together a lot of different projects that have been running over the last 3 to 4 years, looking at ways in which we can standardize metrics, consolidate on some measurements that can be used across countries, particularly in Europe, because Europe is a very fragmented marketplace, and each of the individual countries have grown up with their own sets of research priorities, and also commercial terms of business and ways in which they operate, And I think this is probably the most important of them all, is each country, even though they're members of the European Union, well, at least Britain is for the time being. That may change very shortly, depending on Thursday's election.
That's the next segment,
Yeah.
Simon.
But in terms of what's going on, there is a very, very high level of regulation within most of the European marketplaces. And that has a direct effect on some of the measurements that can take place, not just across television
Right.
audiences, but many other areas.
So this is an interesting point. Again, Europe different, every country different, but regulation and regulatory bodies and governments and the role they play in advertising, particularly from what we saw from GDPR, is different in Europe than it is in the US. In the US, maybe it's a little bit more hands-off. I want to thank you for your leadership.
Well, I think California are going to lead the way from what
I know,
I read.
and thank you for the blueprint.
By the way, there is more to come from the European Union.
Well, and
GDPR was the start. There is a whole new e-privacy directive coming.
And that's exactly getting at my question is, do you think if you had to say publishers, sellers, advertisers, buyers, or regulatory bodies, if there was one of those three you had to pick as the primary driver or catalyst for adopting and accelerating standardization, which one would you pick of those three?
I'd have to give you a politician's answer in that I wouldn't pick one of the three. I think it's a balance between the three.
Okay.
I think the priority, the highest share and the highest pressure has to be, and quite rightly so, from the advertisers, who are our clients.
Right.
And it is the advertisers who actually fund the entire system currently. There are talks, and there are some countries where they have a levy on all advertising, which pays for an awful lot of the research, not just television measurement, but primarily it has been the broadcast television companies that have paid for the television audience measurement. So that's where I would start, would be one is the advertisers, because their advertising pays. Now we've moved into SVOD, and we're increasingly will move into what is being dubbed the streaming wars with Disney Plus, Apple Plus. Peacock I doubt is going to come across the Atlantic, but HBO might, and of course the existing Netflix, Amazon Prime growth within the European markets as well as elsewhere in the world. That's put a whole new perspective on what is regulated and not regulated, so that brings in the regulation part of the discussion, but also then we move into that balance between what the vendor, the sales house, whether that be a broadcaster or an AVOD or some form of streaming service or a collection of streaming services within the what we might call the BVOD, the broadcaster VOD area, yet more subscription VOD, advertising VOD, broadcaster VOD, so many different combinations, but a lot of that coming also back to the platforms that deliver it. And I think we tend to often forget that you have to have the platform from that to be delivered. So for in the UK, example UK, that would be Sky as a platform, not as a set of channels or as a content provider. It would be BT, it would be Virgin or Liberty, as they now are, and indeed things like FreeSat. Going to other countries, there are similar either telco or pay TV platforms, a lot more established in the European marketplace, who all have their own return path data, some of it of high quality, some of it of medium, and some of it sometimes of low quality, again as parts of that whole measurement picture. So to say who should be driving it is a really difficult question, but I would say the primacy has to be with the advertiser. It also has to be with the broadcaster stroke publisher on the non-broadcast side, as those who are using it to monetize their advertising inventory. And then we have, what do we do with the subscription VOD guys who don't actually have an advertising support? Well, if they want to be part of that overall picture, and the same applies to the walled gardens and the platforms, and both Google and Facebook have been engaged in considerable discussions with a number of European JICs, Barb in the UK, the AGF in Germany, Barb's equivalent. I won't try and give you the German explanation, but basically AGF is Fernsehen is television. That's the F part of it. The A and the G group, and I can't remember, I think advertising group Fernsehen. So that's what AGF stands for. They've had those same conversations, particularly Google. And let's remember, Google have had their own single source panels in Europe for, certainly I can remember 5 or 6 maybe we can find Matt O'Grady later and ask him. But they've been doing, because Nielsen were heavily involved in those, as indeed were Kantar in Germany and the UK. So all of this is a lot of people doing a lot of incredible work. It's not been brought together yet.
And that's the key.
It's that primacy of who is going to lead that charge. And I think we need to be very careful that it's commercially, governance, metric and standard, and also in terms of pure funding, all put on the right scale, with the right level of expectations as to what is achievable within realistic timelines.
Which is all required for success. So,
and
yeah.
Having been in our business for 40 years, I know everything was needed yesterday.